For as long as I could remember, I'd been haunted by a sense of not belonging. Even as a child, I felt like an outsider, watching life unfold from the periphery. My parents were distant, more absorbed in their own lives than mine, and I was never close to anyone. The few friendships I had were fleeting, dissolving as soon as I let anyone see even a glimpse of the real me. That loneliness followed me into adulthood like a shadow, growing heavier with each failed relationship, every job I couldn't hold on to. The most recent job loss hit me the hardest. I worked in customer service at a call center, soulless, monotonous work, but it paid the bills, until it didn't. They let me go after a downsize, but I knew the real reason. I wasn't like the others. I didn't make small talk at the water cooler, didn't go out for drinks after work. I was just there. After I lost the job, things unraveled quickly. I spent weeks drifting between friends' couches, sometimes even sleeping in my car. People's patience wore thin. "You'll bounce back," they said, but there was no conviction in their voices. They knew, just as I did, that I had nowhere else to go. My last hope was that apartment, cheap, tucked away, forgotten, just like me. I hoped, foolishly maybe, that if I found a place where no one knew me, where no one would care who I was or what I did, I could start over. Maybe in the solitude, I'd finally find peace. It was an old building, tucked away on a quiet street, the kind you might miss if you weren't looking for it. The brick was weathered, ivy creeping up its walls, and the windows were old, with thick glass that had seen decades of grime. The landlord, an elderly man with thinning hair and a weary demeanour, showed me around quickly, pointing out the quirks like he was in a hurry to be done with the tour. "Old plumbing," he said, waving dismissively at the pipes in the bathroom. "Sometimes the hot water's slow." The floors creaked, the walls were yellowed from decades of cigarette smoke, and the paint was chipping. But for the price, it was a steal. Besides, I didn't need anything fancy, just a place to call my own. There was one part of the tour that felt off, though. When we reached the basement, walking down the dimly lit hallway that led to the laundry machines, my attention was drawn to a door I hadn't noticed at first. It was slightly set apart from the others, almost as if it didn't belong. Unlike the worn, chipped doors scattered throughout the basement, this one stood out, painted a deep, matte black that seemed to absorb the dim light around it. Its surface was unnervingly smooth, almost unnatural, without a single crack or blemish. I paused, staring at it for a second, but the landlord barely glanced in its direction. He kept walking, as if the door didn't exist. When I asked about it, he shrugged. "Just an old room, probably sealed up ages ago. Don't worry about it." Something in his tone didn't sit right with me. He was almost too dismissive, too eager to move on, but I figured it wasn't worth pressing him. The rest of the tour was uneventful, and I signed the lease later that day. A few weeks went by, and I barely thought about the black door. I got used to the quirks of the building, the rattling pipes, the thin walls, the faint scent of mold that seemed to linger no matter how many air fresheners I used. The neighbours were quiet, and life went on uneventfully. But then, one night, I heard it. I was heading back to my apartment after grabbing some groceries, my arms full of bags, when I heard a faint sound scratching. I stopped mid-step, straining my ears. It was soft, barely noticeable at first, like the sound of fingernails dragging across wood. I turned slowly, my eyes settling on the black door. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the door. The scratching continued, growing slightly louder, more frantic. It was as if something, or someone, was trapped on the other side, trying to claw its way out. I swallowed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. It was an old building. Maybe it was just rats or the pipes or something else entirely. I told myself I was being paranoid and hurried back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the scratching played on a loop in my mind. It had sounded too deliberate, too purposeful, like something was trying to get my attention. Over the next few days, I found myself passing by the black door more often than usual. Every time I did, I'd slow my pace, listening for that sound. Sometimes, I thought I heard faint scratches or the softest tap, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. One night, after the building had gone quiet, I grabbed a flashlight and went down the hallway. The lights in the corridor flickered weakly as I approached the black door. My heart was pounding, the silence pressing in on me as I stood there, staring at the smooth, glossy surface. I waited, straining to hear anything, breathing, scratching, tapping, but the door was silent. Then I noticed the keyhole. I crouched down, peering through it, expecting to see nothing but darkness. But what I saw was worse. There was an eye staring back at me. Wide, bloodshot, and wild, it darted around frantically, as if it was searching for something, or someone. The pupil was dilated, the whites of the eye streaked with red veins. It was human, or at least it looked human, but there was something horribly wrong with it. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. I felt sick, a wave of nausea rising as the image burned itself into my brain. I ran back to my apartment, slammed the door shut, and tried to convince myself that I hadn't really seen what I thought I had. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe the keyhole was dirty or warped. But deep down, I knew what I saw. For the next few nights, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The tapping started again, late at night, just as I was drifting off to sleep. Tap, tap, tap. Always the same slow, deliberate rhythm, as if someone, or something, was knocking on the walls, trying to get in. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Flickers of movement in the hallway, shadows that didn't belong. I'd hear faint whispers, just on the edge of my hearing, too quiet to make out but always there, haunting the silence of my apartment. When I finally told the landlord about the door, about the eye, about the noises, I expected him to laugh it off, or at the very least, tell me I was imagining things. But his reaction chilled me to the bone. His face went pale, his eyes wide with fear. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight, almost painful. "You didn't look through the keyhole, did you?" he asked angrily. I hesitated, but nodded slowly. His face contorted with fear. "You need to leave it alone. Don't go near that door again. Don't look through it. Don't even think about it. Do you understand?" "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The landlord shook his head, his expression grim. "It's not a room. It's something else. Something that's been here longer than you or me. Just leave it alone." The landlord's warning echoed in my mind for days, but no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, the black door gnawed at my thoughts. His fear only deepened the mystery, adding weight to every shadow I saw in the corner of my eye and every whisper in the dead of night. The tapping returned that evening. Soft, almost gentle, like fingernails grazing wood, as if the thing behind the door knew I was listening. This time, I didn't try to drown it out. I let it fill the silence of my apartment, growing louder in my head with every passing hour. Tap, tap, tap. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I followed my routine, came home and tried to sleep. But that faint sound never left me. It was calling, beckoning. It was midnight when I finally broke. The hallway was eerily quiet, the building asleep, and I found myself standing in front of the black door once again. The cold air seemed to thicken around it, pressing down on me as I raised my flashlight. The light flickered weakly, barely illuminating the smooth surface of the door. My hand hovered over the handle, trembling. I should have turned back. I should have listened to the landlord. But instead, I crouched down. The keyhole stared back at me, a dark, empty circle. My pulse quickened as I leaned forward, my eye pressing against it, expecting to see that same wild, bloodshot eye from before. Nothing. Only pitch-black darkness. I stood up, shaken. Had I imagined it all? Was this just some bizarre game my mind had been playing on me? Suddenly, the door rattled. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. The sound was deafening in the quiet corridor. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for the handle, my hand moving before I could stop it. The door creaked open. It swung inward with a low groan, revealing a void so deep and dark that it seemed to swallow the faint light from the hallway. The cold air that rushed out was suffocating, seeping into my bones as I stood there, frozen at the threshold. I shone my flashlight into the abyss, but the beam vanished, swallowed by the blackness. Then I saw it. A shape, tall and skeletal, emerged from the void, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Its body was impossibly thin, its skin stretched taut over its bones, pale as moonlight. Long, spindly fingers dangled from its hands, each one twitching slightly as it stepped closer. Its face, if you could call it that, was stretched thin, pale and grotesque, but the most terrifying feature was its eyes. They were bloodshot, wild, just like the one I had seen through the keyhole. Two bulging, frantic orbs darted around in their sockets, their whites streaked with red veins. No mouth, no nose, just those eyes, too large for its face, too full of a madness I could now feel creeping into my own mind. My legs refused to move. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body was rooted in place, locked in some terrible trance as the thing approached. The flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering uselessly to the floor, its beam now pointing toward the ceiling. And then the creature stopped, inches away from me. I could feel its cold breath, icy tendrils brushing against my skin as it raised one of those long, bony fingers. Slowly, agonizingly, it reached down, wrapping its fingers around my ankle. The grip was inhuman, cold, unyielding, and impossibly strong. I tried to pull away, but it was no use. The creature's fingers tightened around my leg, and before I could even scream, it yanked me forward. I fell to the ground, my hands scrambling for something, anything to hold on to, but the floor was smooth, offering no resistance as I was dragged toward the door. My vision blurred with panic as the void loomed closer, its darkness enveloping me inch by inch. I kicked, thrashed, clawed at the floor, but the creature's strength was overwhelming. I felt myself being pulled across the threshold, into the freezing blackness. The hallway disappeared, swallowed by the cold void, and the last thing I saw was the door slamming shut behind me. And then suddenly, everything went silent. The darkness is endless, but it's not empty. I can feel it moving around me, whispering things I don't want to hear, shaping me, twisting me into something else. The cold, it's unbearable. It seeps into my bones, into my soul. My fingers are longer now, my skin pale and tight, stretched over sharp bones that weren't there before. I press my face against the door, peering through the keyhole, just like the ones who came before me. I can see the hallway clearly, the flickering light casting long, distorted shadows on the floor. The silence, it's unbearable. It's not just quiet, it's oppressive, like a weight pressing down on me. There's no escape from it, no sound, no movement. I can't think straight anymore. I can barely remember who I was before the door. I feel the urge, stronger now than ever. My fingers twitch, aching to move. I reach out, dragging my nails across the smooth wood of the door. The sound is sharp, brittle, but it helps. It's the only thing that dulls the maddening quiet. Every scrape feels like a release, pulling me further into the void but grounding me at the same time. A new tenant just moved in. I've seen them pass by the door a few times, oblivious. They haven't looked through the keyhole yet. But they will. They always do.